welcome to the Lighthouse Conversations. We're honored tonight to have with us Nada Debs, who many of you I'm sure know. Nada in many ways, in my view, and I think a lot of people's views, defines contemporary Middle East design. She's a pioneer. She's been doing this for some time now. She's worked across a lot of mediums, done a lot of collaborations, and has been pioneering various forms. So I'm going to just start off, Nada, ask you a little bit about yourself. I think a lot of people in the audience know you, but I think it'd be good for you to just tell us a bit, where did you grow up?
Okay.
What did you study? Just give us a bit of a sense for yourself.
Okay. So I grew up in Japan. I don't know if any of you know Kobe. It's a port city. My family went to Japan in 1917. So they went down the Silk Route from Damascus, because there was no Lebanon at the time. It was Greater Syria. Started in Damascus, went down the Silk Route, reached Shanghai, and heard of opportunities in 1917 in Kobe. So he took the boat to Kobe, and since then my family's been there. My brothers are still there, and basically I grew up there.
So why did you leave? Or was there a conscious decision to leave, or you just went to school?
So I went to high school there, kindergarten, high school, then university at the Rhode Island School of Design. It was not a conscious, yes, it was a conscious decision to leave, because maybe my brothers and sisters did not feel it, but I personally felt this really need to identify with my roots. So I found myself not directly going back to Beirut, but taking some steps to eventually reach. Yeah.
Did you know when you left, so you went to RISD, you moved to London, the UK for a little while,
right,
and eventually you made your way back to Beirut.
Yeah.
Did you know all along that that was the journey? I mean, was that like a purposeful move? I'm going to sort of go through my education, get some practical experience, and then move to Beirut, or that just happened as sort of an organic process?
You know, nothing I've done has been planned, and
that's good.
and so everything has been a surprise. But I remember when I went to RISD, and I stayed in the States for a while, I was searching for this sense of community that we didn't have in Japan. So in Japan, you know, there were all kinds of people, all kinds of backgrounds, religions, but no one that I personally can relate to. And I was thinking that it's really not the place for me to be, because it's very, it didn't have a community, and I was really seeking it. So I thought, where's another city in the world where I can speak English, and there might be an Arab community that I can communicate with? And so I chose London.
Okay. And then what happened? So since nothing was planned.
So what I thought was, when I was in the States, I graduated with an interior architecture degree. But what I had done is, on my weekends, I started to play with furniture, because up in Ithaca, New York, there's nothing. So I was looking for contemporary furniture, and there was nothing. So basically, I started to play around with some furniture.
Okay.
I had only taken one course at Rhode Island School of Design in furniture. And I look back actually 15 years later, and I had an A+ in that course, which I didn't know. Yeah. So in Ithaca, I started to play around with making furniture, visiting some workshops, making some small pieces for my own self. And at that time, Philip Stark was starting to become the big name. And in New York, they had started this new show called ICFF. I went to the first edition, and I thought one day I would love to be there. And I did after many years.
Just for those of us that didn't study design, so is there a conscious decision, again, I'm just going to these are deliberate decisions, between I want to be a product designer, I want to do interior design, I want to do, you know, or did you just sort of find furniture as something that grabbed you from the beginning?
It was a hobby, actually.
Okay.
It was something, like I said, I was searching for some nice furniture. I couldn't find any. So I started to make some. And when I moved to London, I did the same, because in London, in the 90s, there was no contemporary furniture design scene. It's nothing like it is today. And wherever I went, they talked about antiques, and marquetry and craft and the value of craft. And very few places has contemporary furniture. So I decided to make my own.
So what was that piece of furniture? What was the start?
So I started by making a very streamlined shelf that looked very Japanese.
Okay.
And I used a tiny bit of marquetry on the edge, because that's what they were talking about, And I had some friends starting to visit me, and they're like, Nada, when I move to my new house, will you make some furniture for me? I said, yes, I will. So that's how it started. It was really literally a hobby that people saw, and they asked me to make furniture.
And I mean, you have, I think, somewhat of a distinct style that's evolved over time in terms of your different product design, and some of it we see here, and some of it is on display over there as well. Were you conscious of that at the beginning? So some people describe it as sort of a minimalist style and then using Middle Eastern craftsmanship. So it fuses, and at some point you coined it as East and East.
Yes.
Again, was that something that you were aware from the beginning? You want to blend some of your sort of Japanese and upbringing and the minimalist style that they were very well known for with kind of your Middle East heritage and craftsmanship, or that just sort of organically popped and happened?
Again, it was very organic.
Just happened.
Just happened. So I had moved to Beirut after that because I realized again London did not have what I was looking for. I moved to Beirut in like 18 years ago, and I started to make some contemporary furniture that looks, actually, if you look at it, it would be like a Japanese designer who designed. Nothing to do with the Middle Eastern market.
And how do people react to that? For a region that's very maximalist.
Well,
I mean, maybe not Lebanese, but
the contemporary people really loved it.
So they got it.
Traditional people, no.
Okay.
But then one day, a friend of mine came to me and said, Nada, I want to open a Lebanese restaurant in London. What can you do? So I thought, let me go around and look for some craft. What's happening in the Middle East? And of course, Damascus was the place to go. And because of my visits to all these antique galleries in London, I was very aware of the value of craft. And
can I just ask you something? Sorry to interrupt again. Did he specify, I want a contemporary read on sort of...
He did say that, yeah.
Or did he just give you carte blanche
No.
and do as you wish, and you went with the contemporary?
No, he said he wanted to do a contemporary restaurant because the food was fusion, Lebanese fusion. Okay. So I thought, why don't we do the same with that? So I went to Damascus, and to be honest, it was very hard to find craftspeople there. You know, most of the good ones are hidden, and so we did a lot of searching around, and finally walked into an amazing workshop. So usually the doors are tiny. I don't know if you know how it is. You go down these little alleys and you don't see anything. It's bare road, and you see this tiny little doorway.
You have no idea what's behind it.
You have no idea, and you walk in there and you see this vast space of everybody working really hard with this mother of pearl inlay, etc. So I looked at one of these guys. He's doing this table with very intricate work. And, you know, I asked him, so how do you do this? So he was explaining with such pride and smiling. And, you know, he was like, look how this is done, and look how this is done. He had very not nice teeth even. I'm smiling, and I was like, oh, what is he talking about? And then I look at the workmanship, and it is so beautiful. The workmanship itself, the process is beautiful, but the actual end product was really not appealing.
And why is that?
It was just too overly ornamental, you know? And I felt really bad, actually. My heart, it was a very emotional moment. Until now, I get like very tearful when I think about it, because I was thinking, you know, these guys are working so hard. And no one
so much
really,
skill that goes into that work. So much
skill, and no one really is appreciating it. Like, I felt like very few people can appreciate the intricacy of the work. So something in my head told me I need to do something about this. I forgot about the restaurant. You know, I was just thinking, what can I do?
The poor guy.
Yeah, the poor guy. What can I do to give a new perspective to this craft? And it was very simple for me because I grew up in Japan, and the Japanese are all about less is more. It's about removing, leaving everything down to its essence. So for me, it was like, can you just do me one little line of diamond-shaped mother of pearl? And they didn't understand, what was it?
So mother of pearl from the beginning was sort of one of your...
Yeah.
Okay.
It was something very strong. It's
that you
something
felt
that
would want to integrate into
yes,
your work.
and I think it was something that we can be proud to say it's from our region.
Yeah.
You know. So just to go back, when I was making my contemporary pieces in Beirut, I was trying to price, and I was thinking, if I was in China, this would have been done much cheaper. Like, why am I making something that could be made much cheaper somewhere else? What can I make that is very regional, that nobody in the world can do except us? So that was another reason I went into craft.
So this is, I think, a very interesting point. We discussed this a little bit in Beirut when I saw you. So
Yeah.
obviously you pride yourself, and it's sort of part of your mission to work with local craftsmen, design, etc., and for many reasons,
Yeah.
right? And that was one of the reasons you went back to Beirut, and you wanted to engage with the local community over there. A lot of that work that usually is done is very ornamental, more traditional, and you are looking to do something different with
Yes.
their craft
Yeah.
and with the products that you're finding.
Yeah.
How do you then integrate that into a product that's also accessible to the market from a price perspective? Because ultimately, as you said, so a lot of people would come, they will design something and then send it to China or Portugal, and therefore get a much lower price point, probably
Right.
not as high of a quality.
Right.
You insist on that level of quality.
Yeah.
So how do you balance these? How do you balance these two things when you're deciding on a new design?
Yeah. It's very difficult.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can
because
imagine.
when I'm designing, I'm always keeping in mind, the amount of work that it involves.
Sure.
But usually, what I do, the way I work on it, is when I launch a new collection, I always do three different
Prototypes.
collections within the collection. So basically, I make one limited edition piece that expresses my idea, and that's usually done full on, very expensive, all the way. Because I can't compromise. I don't want to compromise to show something very valuable. Then I make a second set of collection, which is just some occasional furniture pieces,
Okay.
and then I make some small, accessible,
More accessible.
objects.
So it's almost like fashion, using haute couture and then going.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay,
It's actually
so it's
like
a
that.
similar strategy.
Yeah.
And has that worked?
It works because when they see the big piece, they can see what the whole idea is. And then the other items are just a reminder and a memory, something that they can actually buy and it's accessible to them.
So in a way, for those buying, it's sort of an aspirational thing in a way, right?
Yeah. It's like when you're in fashion.
Yeah.
You have the unwearable items,
Yeah, like I go
the
into
ones
Hermes,
on
but then I wind up with a little small leather thing
Yeah,
because it's
yeah.
sort of an aspirational
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And so that has been the process you've used from the beginning.
Yes.
Have you found yourself?
Actually, no, not from the beginning.
So it's trial and error.
Trial and error. Much later on, when I realized that I've become a brand. Yeah. I had no idea I was a brand.
So I want to get to that because
Yeah.
we talked about this a bit
Yeah.
earlier. So you
Yeah.
were kind of almost like, without belittling it obviously, because I think from the beginning you had a lot of impact in terms of your design aesthetic and philosophy in a way. But you were kind of almost homegrown.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden you woke up and you became a business.
Yes.
And that business was growing not just in Beirut, then in the region and then abroad. And all of a sudden your designs were in London and New York and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to ask the same question whether that was conscious or not. Probably it wasn't. But how did you make that jump and what were the challenges that you faced
Yeah.
doing that?
Actually, I really didn't make the jump. People made the jump for me.
This is great.
So basically, I worked from home. I started with these floating stools that were not craft oriented. Then I got to know these craftsmen in Damascus, started to make some pieces. My home actually became a gallery space. So I would just have some tea time, people would come and visit me. And one day I got one of the newspapers, Daily Star or something, and they said they wanted to do an interview. And I was very far from any of that world of journalism, and so they did this article, and after they did the article, a lot of people started to call me and they wanted to visit my home, which is a bit strange because you have people coming to a residential area in Beirut.
Became a studio essentially, or showroom, without really wanting it to be one.
Yeah, and then one day so I started to get also the Kuwaiti people from the Gulf area visiting. And it became like very busy. I had to then hire another designer to design with me. I had no idea what was happening, but all I know was I was waking up very early in the morning with my eyes closed and the coffee in my hand. I'd be already on the computer. And I
Were
was
you
really,
thrilled or terrified, or both?
Actually, no, I was excited.
Okay.
I was like really surprised at what was happening. Yeah, and so. When the Gulf people started to come, I had to ship the items, and I needed the shipping people. So one day, these three people came, men in suits. They came to my salon, and I thought to myself, this is really embarrassing that these shipping people in suits come to a home, in Verdun, which is not, and I'm like, I have to get out. I can't be in Beirut. So I found this perfect location in Beirut, which was between East and West, because it was after the war, year maybe 2003, something like that. And there was kind of this neutral location between the East and West Beirut. And I thought it would be the perfect location to open where I have access to both
sides, both worlds in a way.
And so I opened my showroom in December 2003. And so none of this idea of being Nada Debs, nothing was signed. I had no idea about branding. So
you were following your instinct
I was just following my instinct, and I decided to, actually it was a very nice showroom. I did a little video of how the inlay work was done. And I don't know who came to my shop, and they would say, wow, this looks so Zen. But then they said, no, but it looks very Middle Eastern. And I thought, oh, wait, because, I've been having this identity crisis. Like, who am I? Japanese, Arab? My mind is very Japanese, but I look Arab. And I thought, oh, wait, maybe I don't have to choose either to be an Arab or Japanese. Maybe I could be both, because it seems like my furniture is showing both. So I decided to call my concept East and East, which is the Middle Eastern craft with Far Eastern minimalism or thinking.
Which is so much more interesting in East and West in
many
ways.
It's quite
which is sort of highly overused. So East and East is
East and East, and then
great.
It wasn't. And then some people would repeat after me and say East or West, East or East. I said no, East and East. And so the philosophy of "and" is actually something that you can take beyond just furniture, and because it is really about, bringing together. And if you really look at my work today, it's really about finding the balance of opposites, whether it's cultural or craft or materials. I'm always looking for this kind of balance. And when you really look at these trays, they kind of explain
the hybridity.
The hybridity, yes. Yeah. The idea of opposites coming together and finding this connection.
But so we spend a lot of time here thinking about this hybridity, and I think if you look at the audience, we know a lot of them. Many of them in their work, and I think in their personal lives as well, have dealt with that.
Yeah.
They may have grown up somewhere, but then, so they may have grown up in the Middle East, for example, but then studied and worked abroad. Yeah. Then they come back, and there's this dichotomy between, either East and West or East and East.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm very interested in hearing is you sort of co-opted that hybridity and made it part of your process. Yeah. And then it became very fluid. It didn't become contrarian anymore.
No.
So how did you manage doing that? Because a lot of us, for example, when we opened this place, there was a lot of hybridity. I mean, we have been inspired by elements both from our upbringing, which in my case, for example, was in Egypt, but also from my experiences, which in many cases were in the West, in the US, and the UK, etc. sometimes I can reconcile the two, sometimes I can't.
Yeah.
How did you make peace with that and kind of almost use it as a strength?
You know what? It was all very, very subconscious.
Okay.
It was like, you know, when it comes to the Middle Eastern work, it's very decorative and very ornamental. And I came from a school of thought where ornament is a big no-no. Yeah.
Yes.
But what I realized in the Middle East is the ornament is actually a necessity. It's a need, and it does bring out a functional, emotional need. It is a function that has to be, so it's functional, you know, because they say that, you know, what I was taught at RISD is, you know, no decorative elements, just enough to create that object, but decoration was a big no-no. So I was very hesitant in using it, but I realized that when people saw the geometry, the patterns that I was using, it was actually very fulfilling, especially the people who lived abroad and came back. So it happened to be very good timing.
We could relate to it.
Yeah. When I had come and done this work, there were a lot of people who had come back from studying abroad. And they were all, you know, dressed very contemporary, they were modern in their thinking, but they were really seeking something very local.
Yeah.
And I actually was able to capture that for them. You know, it was just good timing. But so for me, using those patterns was a way of relating to the identity of this part of the world. So that was part of my hybridity, is how to use those patterns in the most minimal way, and that's where that balancing was working.
Well,
on.
I think that the fascinating part is so I remember the first time seeing some of your work and seeing, I think, a wooden tray with sort of pearl inlay. And, you know, as you said exactly, it was sort of struck by, it was sort of contemporary, yet had elements that I understood from my own background and upbringing and so on. But you're going for something timeless, because I still have that tray, and I was using it this morning, and someone complimented me on it who came from Sweden. So they understood certain things, maybe differently than me, but both understood the aesthetics. Now, how do you make that timeless but also functional? Because obviously a lot of product design has to be functional. So it's not just something that's pretty, it has to work as well.
So what's kind of interesting after, you know, because after so many interviews with magazines, you know, I started to understand myself more and how I actually came up with all this. And I realized, you know, just like my family who went down the Silk Route, you know, there was a lot of exchange, because I studied a lot about the Silk Route and how there has been so much exchange in craft and design and ideas. And so, for example, ceramics came to Turkey, glass went to Bohemia, silk went to Venice, you know, so there was a lot of exchange. So I thought to myself, in a way, the fact that I grew up in Japan, I picked up the aesthetics of minimalism. Then I went to the States, where the Americans actually are very practical people.
Yes.
So I don't know if you know the back to basics shaker mentality, where everything is just very practical.
Practical, yeah. Has to work.
Yeah, and they also, what was really amazing about the Americans is it's such a young country, they look to the future. So they had the glass industry, they had the, you know, resin, the plexiglass, metal, the steel industry. So they always look to the future. Then I moved to London, and in London, the Europeans looked to the past. So they revered the past, right?
Well, they had a better past probably than their present. So maybe that was one of the reasons.
So,
I don't know.
Yeah, so basically they cared about craft, they cared about antiques, and it was something that they valued very much. And it was very sophisticated, because after many years of doing this work, you know, I learned about how sophisticated this craft is. And I come to the Middle East and I see the value of using patterns and geometry, which is based, you know, the Islamic religion took on geometry as their way of expressing themselves. So I got very much interested in geometry itself, because geometry is really the language that any human being can use universally. And you were talking about timelessness. So if you get a child in Alaska, maybe, you tell them to draw something on the snow, they can probably draw a circle
Sure.
or something. And then someone in the Sahara Desert would do the same. So basically, geometry is innate. So I think that's why you see a lot of geometric shapes, because that is something that every human being can relate to. And in terms of the function of the products, because of all the different continents that I lived in, and I picked up all these different design aesthetics, so functionality, practicality from the States, and appreciation of craft, using ornament, and at the same time keeping it minimalist. I actually covered the world. So in a way, that is really all because of my personal journey, that the end result.
And what were
came
the
about.
first designs where you felt you really consciously used geometry as a sort of main element?
Yeah.
Was it, or was it something else? I mean, because obviously you've used geometry in quite a lot of work.
Yeah.
Also some of the carpentry work recently.
Yes.
You and I collection that you've
Yeah.
done recently.
Yeah.
What was the first?
Well, that was the more, like recently the geometric shapes are much more bold and evident. Before it was much more within the pattern itself.
Subtle.
It's much more subtle. But I realized that it is something that today people are really, they need something bold and, attractive. And this is really a story of love, actually. So I use
How so?
geometry.
Explain.
Yeah, I use geometry to explain love.
Okay.
Yeah.
We all like stories of love.
Yeah. So if you can see the two shapes, like circles and rectangles, I look at everyone, and each of us is different. When we connect, there's a common element. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And this common element is crafted, and it's done by a craftsman. And what I call the craft work is a labor of love, because love is actually giving attention to things. Yeah. And when you give attention, you're putting your energy into whatever you're doing. It could be even cooking. When you cook for someone you love, the food is always good. Yeah. So this common element where the craftsman is working and which is putting his energy of love is the common element between the two shapes. Yeah. And that's what connects us, I think.
So energy is a major component of how you think about these creations, right?
Yeah.
So walk us a little bit through that.
Yeah.
And how do you, so if you feel a certain energy, and then because now you have a team that you work with as well.
Yeah.
How do you kind of translate that into a team exercise?
Yeah.
Because you have to inspire them, they have to think along the same lines, all of that.
I mean, first of all...
Do you guys do like yoga together in the morning? Or
No, but I'm thinking of doing that.
Okay.
But spirituality has been something that I've been very interested for many years, but it's become much more evident after I started working with the craftsmen. Because there are many, many great designers in the Middle East and everywhere. But why are people so focused and they come and they really love what I do? And I question that. Like, what's so special about my work as opposed to other people's work? And, my forms were very simple. There's nothing complicated about them. Like, why would they like my things, So I questioned that a lot, and I realized it's actually the energy of the craftsman that people were feeling, that love, that energy. And when you really look at like the Sufis and even like what they do, because they do carpets and they do scarves, and anything that's repetitive is a form of meditation. And so this is what the craftsmen are doing, and we're feeling it. And I think that's what people are feeling when they're seeing these repetitive patterns happening. And
so you really feel that comes through? I mean,
Yeah.
I feel it does come through.
I
When I'm
think
looking
it
at some
comes
of the
through very subconsciously. It's not conscious in any way. It's very subconscious. And there's no way a craftsman can work, because I feel like I was able to touch upon the emotion and the sense of identity that they were searching for.
Well, I think it's, as you said, it's subconscious. I mean, I was actually printing something today. Lara will relate to this. And I realized that we were inspired in many ways. Some of it conscious, some of it subconscious, but a lot of your work. I was looking at the values that we had put together on a piece of paper when we launched Lighthouse.
Yeah.
And it's beacon, timeless, experimental, functional, and communal. So you can see how many of them you know, in many ways translate into your work. And obviously, many of us have known your work for a long time and have been very taken by it. So I think they are sort of global values, but difficult to translate.
Yes.
We use it as a almost like a check mark that we go back to.
Yes.
So whenever we look at all our elements here, you know, whether it's food or music or the design store, or even these conversations, you know, do we tick these boxes or not? And that brings us back, I think, to our basic core values.
Yes.
Let me kind of just jump here quickly. You showcased in Milan Design Week with Rossana Orlandi last year.
Yeah.
Those mirrors were there. Were they designed for Design Week? And can you tell us a little bit more about how that came about?
These mirrors, they were just an expression. So I had made the carpets that look like a bit like my trays.
Absolutely,
so
the UNI series.
The carpets are the UNI series, so based on the love story. And
the carpets were made.
They were made in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So last year, actually, it was in Design Week last year.
Design Week, yeah.
So we launched with Cyril Zamit, who introduced...
Absolutely, and they're stunning carpets.
Yeah, he's introduced me to FBMI, which is an initiative to empower the women carpet weavers.
And they're right here.
And they're right here. And the idea was to empower the carpet weavers by, you know, giving them something new to do. So I came up with the new NI carpet. And within it, it's all about the geometric shapes. So this is kind of like breaking it apart. Yeah.
So it's amazing.
Again, it's playing around, and I really like things that are adaptable and flexible. So it's industrial in the fact that, you know, you can make many of them, but it's personalized in the way that you can use them. So you can decide to just buy 3 circles.
Yeah, I could buy 3.
Yeah. So every person is able to take this and apply it in their own.
Put them in a cluster,
yeah,
or spread them. So I know that one of the exercises when we wanted to hang them here is,
yeah,
how do you hang them? Do you know?
Yeah.
Do you make it in clusters? Do you
Right.
kind of spread them?
Yeah.
Do
so you can
vary
play
the
with
shapes?
yourself. And you know, I moved to my studio space. I had the shop in the downtown area in Beirut, and in March I moved to a studio space, actually not even on a ground level, on a 3rd floor. And I wanted that kind of experience for people to come into the old part of Beirut, go up this old falling apart elevator, and going into a space.
It's a beautiful space.
That is really like originally a home. It had the old Lebanese tiles. And it's a studio space as well as a gallery space, as well as, you know, just like a home feeling.
Yeah.
So you don't really know whether you're going into a home or a gallery or a studio.
It's like walking into a loft, and then you have all the
and
different
people
elements.
are very comfortable in that space because of that. And I have a room that's called the sample room. And this sample room is really the heart and soul of the brand, where what I had done is eventually asked all these craftsmen to experiment with the craft. So not just do what they've been doing, but add new elements like resin, concrete, working with really new materials, up-to-date materials. And so this room is full of samples. Some of them have been made into furniture, but I can't do it all.
Of course.
And so it's a platform for people to come and make their own furniture. And my whole move was called Up Close and Personal, because I really wanted people to come closer to the creative process. And I feel like today, in today's retail world, there's so much out there. And
there's a lot of noise.
A lot of noise. So how do you relate to the object? And I felt that if you actually put your input in it, so if a client comes, they put their input, they would really feel good when they have their piece. So the feel-good factor for me is very important. Yeah. So this room is like really a platform for anybody, from designers to just, you know, a layperson.
If before I open up to our guests, if you because I'm sure there's a lot of aspiring designers in the room, if you would give them one piece of advice, and I think what we have found here challenging is a lot of designers have the right ideas, but they struggle in the production process, and they struggle in the business creation process.
Yeah.
One, have you found these 2 pieces difficult, challenging? And if so, what would you advise sort of budding new upcoming designers?
Yeah.
How can they circumvent some of these challenges
Yeah.
if they're in the region?
It's really not easy these days, but I would say persevere, don't give up. But actually you have to also look around to see what exists already, because there's no point in repeating what's already there.
Yeah.
So, and you need to put yourself in it. Yeah, you need to put your uniqueness, your touch, how you see things into the work. So it's very important that you combine what's existing out there, and you have to really listen to what people are looking for and what people need. Because I actually listen a lot. I'm very aware of what's happening in today's world, the trends. I mean, I remember I was sitting and watching Mad Men, you know, the series.
Of course.
And I had this eureka moment because the furniture in the series was amazing. And I thought, wait, how come people had put mother of pearl in the Louis XV chairs, Louis XIV chairs? How come we can't put it in vintage furniture? So there I started a whole collection called Vintage Meets Arabesque, and it was very on trend, you know.
That's great.
And then last year, before this Funketry collection, I was also going through a phase of watching anime, Japanese anime. And I was looking at this anime and I was thinking, what is anime all about? You know, why are the Japanese like, you know, why is there this craze around the world? And I realized that in today's hard world, people are looking for, anime is fantasy, right? If you wanted like
escape,
10 hands, you can have 10 hands.
Yeah.
So for me, I thought, why don't I get inspired by that? So, you know, I created a whole line called Now and Zen, which is based
Now
on
and Zen, what is
Now
it?
and Zen, yeah, which is based
Not
on
Zen as an Arabic way of pronouncing then.
No,
Just to be
maybe.
I just want to be okay.
So that whole line was based on fantasy and you know, bold forms and colors, bright color. So you know, it's really important as designers to really see what's happening, what people are searching for, what gives them satisfaction. You know, we have to keep our eyes open, and then add your touch. You know, that's like cooking. It's a formula.
Absolutely.
Add your touch, and then persevere.
Yeah.
Don't give up.
Stick with
Because
your
it's very, very
instincts in a way.
hard to. It's very easy to give up in this world, but people respect perseverance. I noticed.
I think you're right.
Even if you're not doing well, keep at it, and there will be a comeback. Nothing remains where it is.
Well said.
So keep going.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to just see if any questions.
Why did you choose to go to RISD to study instead of studying in Japan? I mean, a lot of us would have dreamt to go study in Japan rather than India.
Today, Japan is nothing like what it was then. So until like maybe the 80s or 90s, Japan was like really backwards. I mean, my mother used to buy shoes in Beirut and take them to Japan. She used to buy chocolate in Beirut and take them to Japan. You know, Japan was really, we used to walk on dirt road. So it was not so advanced. It's only after the 80s, when the big economic boom happened, that they opened up really to the West. And that's when, so Japan today is like the coolest place, I agree. If you have a chance to go there and study, that's the place to be. But at that time, no. And actually, RISD was a very, very, it was really the passport to
Still is in many ways.
success in the design field. Like in London, you have the Royal College of Art. In the States, it's RISD. When you tell everybody you're from RISD, yeah, all of a sudden everyone looks at you in a new way, in a different way.
Very true.
So, and it's actually true because they did teach us to study and push our minds without focusing on finances or even if we can actually make it, you know, just push our conceptual thinking. So, yeah, that's why. Otherwise, I would have chosen Japan, of course.
You were saying you didn't know that you were a brand. I'm curious to know, when did you become a brand and when did you realize you were a brand?
I'll tell you, this is what's funny. So when I opened my shop in Saifi, it wasn't a shop. I thought I had opened a studio space, just like my home. but with a window on the street. And so I put my furniture and some samples, and I had my desk. And people started to come in and say, oh, so can you take credit cards? I said, credit cards? I'm a design studio. And then after a while they would say, can you gift wrap? I said, gift wrap? I don't sell, Then I realized, having the window, I became a shop.
Yeah.
And I had to hire a salesperson to start selling. So I didn't realize the impact of what I was doing. And I was working till like 11 p.m., 12 p.m. at night, crying because I had a pile of work. I was all alone with one designer, part-time. And I was crying, and I was like, what am I going to do? How am I going to support, do everything? And all of a sudden, I met, somebody who said, you don't sign your work? I said, no, what do you mean? She goes, and then I said, what do you mean, sign my work? She goes, you have to put Nada Debs on everything you do. I said, I do? I said, but how am I going to control that? And then I had to, and she goes, just get a graphic designer. So I tried one graphic designer, I wasn't happy, second one, third one, fourth. And I finally found a graphic designer. Then someone says, why are you bringing things from the flea market? Because that's what I used to do. I used to have things from the flea market. I would add some Nada Debs touches, like get rid of everything from the flea market. You can only have Nada Debs products with Nada Debs written on it. I said, what? But that's not me. So I went through a period where I found my shop like so empty because I only had my
minimalist,
thing.
you can spin it like that.
Yeah, I can say minimalist. So that is really when it happened. It was very, it was after talking to people who came from the business world. So I really had no clue. I didn't even know anything about accounting, lawyers, none of it. It was all really
It was coming from the heart.
Very organic, yeah. So I had the ball rolling, and I was like running after this ball to catch it. It was a monster that was being created. It's only like maybe 4 or 5 years ago when I caught that ball, and I'm more in control. Yeah. It was a tough journey.
So during the process of design, when do you know that it is good enough now? Because you can constantly keep on adding stuff, right? When do you stop and think this is good enough?
Yeah. You know what? It's never good enough for me. I always leave that 10% of leeway. But time, like I have a show and I have no choice. I have to get it done.
Do you think you're a perfectionist, Nada? Because obviously a lot of designers struggle with this sort of, to your point. Some of them didn't hear the question, what's good and when is it enough to stop?
Yeah. The thing is, I'm never satisfied. I'm never happy. I need to get feedback from others. But there is a feeling that you get when something is like good enough, and that's when I stop.
Is that an inner feeling, or do you want to get that feedback from the customer, or both?
It's inner feeling.
It's inner feeling.
It's inner feeling.
Okay.
It's because usually you set a concept. So as long as it fulfills that concept, then it's done. So, and I have to be clear about what I'm selling. So I question it and like, is it am I being correct? Am I faking it? Am I so I have to make sure that what I say and the end product is consistent.
2 questions. Do you do collections by season, or do you sort of just kind of do a collection whenever you feel like doing a collection?
That's what I used to do.
Okay.
Yeah, but nowadays, now it's become really a business, and I have a lot of work with clients. So I launch about a collection a year. Yeah, but if you ask me how much I design probably a product every week. But I can't make that into collections. So before I used to create so much, and I realized that people don't get it when you over design, when you design too much. And people need at least over a year actually for them to absorb
What you have put out.
At least a year. So it takes time. That's why I insist on perseverance, like staying with it.
How did you sell to the European market? Or how did you start selling to the European market?
One of the things that I didn't mention, but growing up in Japan, I hated being an Arab. I was a Muslim, an Arab. There weren't anyone I can relate to. So I really was actually almost ashamed to be an Arab. Yeah? And when I moved to Beirut, actually I became proud of being an Arab because there was something so warm about the people there. And that's something that we have in our part of the world that nobody else has, is human warmth and generosity, the combination. There are many countries that are generous, but they might not be warm. There are many countries that are very cold and not generous, But to have this combination, it's very much our regional characteristics. So, what was I saying? I forgot.
No, I said well said.
Yeah, the European market. So when I moved to the Arab world, I was like, why did I think of the Arab world about being an Arab as so negative? And why did I have such a complex about being an Arab? And I noticed, even in Beirut, when I started to make furniture, I actually approached many shops. I said, would you carry a Lebanese designer? And they said, no, of course not. The Lebanese only like imported. So I was really challenged. I'm like, really? That's how you think? That means that we're not proud of who we are. Just like I wasn't proud of who I was. So I decided to only make furniture locally and not to export. I wanted, to export, not to import. Is that it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, I did not want to run after anyone. I wanted people to come to us. So that's why, to me, it's very important that I create an environment where we welcome people. That's why being in this home studio is a place where people feel really welcome, and it's as if they're coming home.
But I think that's also how you, I'm not trying to flatter you, but debunk that myth, because I think for a lot of Arabs, they were, as you said, importing everything, partially because there wasn't that much in terms of quality.
Yeah.
And you freely debunked that myth and opened the doors to a lot of other
Yes.
designers. I mean,
Yeah.
in Lebanon and elsewhere in the Middle East, where now it's almost the opposite. I mean, it's almost more cool to be buying and supporting Arab and Middle East design than importing. And you see this trend in design, you see it in F&B, you see it in a
Yes,
lot of different
true. Yeah.
industries
Yeah.
where people are more and more comfortable with sort of brands and designs and creations they understand because they can relate to it. And there's a lot of, you in the audience, a lot of people in the audience here that I think have done, also a lot of amazing work. So, did you think of yourself as, sorry, I jumped back in.
No, it's okay.
Did you think of yourself as a trailblazer? I mean, or that just sort of happened? It's a
no.
bit to like Heba's question about, did you just wake up and I'm like, oh, I've done this?
I didn't know the impact I had. I still don't realize the impact I have. But a lot of young people, the new designers, they always come to me and they like, Nada, you paved the way. And I realized it was a lot of work to convince even the craftspeople because you have to work with egos and people who have a lot of pride. And to me, coming from Japan, it was easy, like I was able to work with these people. And what I did to these craftsmen is I gave them a kind of vision. I told them, what you're doing is going somewhere. So that kind of...
you give them a path to growth in a way, interesting.
Yeah, so they grew with me.
Yeah, different than what they were doing, which is sort of the more traditional, ornamental.
What do you think about the design movement in Dubai and what's happening in here? Knowing that there's a lot of people that are not from Dubai working here, and there's a lot of, as well, growing scene here from the locals. So what do you think about it, and what do you think it's missing still?
I actually really like the attempts that, because, I just saw today, there's a pottery show. People are addressing, vernacular architecture and design. I think it's really, really nice that people are going into that. And because of this hype of design, people are really looking for things, so I think it's very positive. What's missing? I guess there's not enough craftspeople that are missing, but maybe you can create new craft. I don't know. I mean, maybe new craft forms can be created. The idea is to actually work with your hands, work with in a meditative way. I think that's craft, So we can create it. I think the new generation can create and are creating. I'm very impressed with what's happening.
I wanted to ask, how was the production process? Is it very restrictive to the design that you're creating, or is it?
Yes, it is restrictive.
How
And you know, you'd think in Beirut we're restricted with cost because it's very expensive, and quality is not bad, but we work on it a lot. We have like a quality control person all the time. It's very important, yeah. But that is something, because I had to prove to us first, before I'm going abroad, I had to prove that we're supposed to do good quality
Proof
work.
of concept, yeah.
So I had to really work hard on making sure the quality was good. So, yeah.
I thought it was interesting. I mean, Mona is also in a similar business, furniture, but in Egypt, and I think you
Okay.
face similar issues. And one of the points that are very interesting that Nada said is that she gave some of those craftsmen also kind of an impetus in terms of growing with her in different direction, which is not something you see every day. And that, I don't know if that's exactly a different kind of motivation, right? So that if you're growing, they're growing with you, and they're going places, and that I think is
Because I mean, imagine they're just repeating the same thing in front of their. They don't even know where these pieces
the
going.
bigger picture.
So when you give, you know, them hope that this thing. And what's really interesting is that they start giving you new ideas. I mean, some of them have inspired me. You know, not the other way.
Have you worked with the same ones, or have they been with you for a long time?
A lot
Many of
yes,
them have.
Yeah, because you know, to choose them, there was a lot of trial and error. But once I found first loyalty, respect, loyalty, and then good relation, that actually keeps you going. Yeah. It takes time.
Sure.
Persevere.
Have you been able to maintain any kind of professional relationship with the craftsmen in Damascus since during the circumstances? How have the events in Syria affected production?
Well, I mean, I brought the people to come to Beirut, so now they have a workshop in Beirut. But last month I actually took a trip to Damascus. I went for the day, and I said, let me go visit my first guy that I visited and that I worked with. And I walked over, and he's had my chair still there from like, I don't know, 13, 14 years ago. But what I found is I went to a few other workshops. I found they had pictures of my work from the internet. They stuck it on the walls, and they were making pieces from it.
Amazing.
So to be honest,
So they're very proud of.
they're very proud. At the beginning, when they were actually, a lot of people started to imitate what I was doing because they liked the idea of modernizing mother of pearl inlay. At the beginning, I was a little bit taken aback. But then today, I really feel that what I had done has created a ripple effect, and all these people are now doing new work, which is a very positive thing. So indirectly, I've helped out a lot of people because they have something new to work on. Because you know, there's a big community who's demanding, like, even as simple as tissue boxes. You know, like, you know, the rectilinear tissue boxes. You know, with a bit of mother of pearl. That's all something new. So.
But you have no fear that the craftsmanship and the craftsmen are going to die out, or that tradition is going because of the events, because of circumstances?
No, you know, there's a bit of a comeback. There's always demand. People are still seeking that. People are still seeking something of their own identity. What I'm doing is I'm actually pushing it. You know, like this marquetry. This is the same marquetry that's been done on backgammon games for the last, I don't know how many years. So here I added color, and now it's something completely new. I'm sure now they're going to start doing that.
What do you like the most about your job? Like, is it the creative process, the human relations that you have with craftsmen, the satisfaction at the end to see your products realized?
I think the biggest pleasure is coming up with a new craft technique. Like sometimes I like swimming, so in my swimming I come up with ideas, and sometimes I'm like, how come we didn't try this with, you know, with this material? So I'd just rush back to the office. I'd call my craftsman, can you make this? Or talk to my team, can you make these samples? And these samples would sometimes remain on my desk over a year until an idea comes. So basically it's the crafts that I sit with until I come up with a form that brings out the best of the craft. Yeah. So I don't start with the form, I start with the craft. And I look for coming up with a collection that brings out the craft to its best.
We have
Thank you.
a small lighthouse gift for you.
Oh,
It's another
thank
pioneering
you.
Arab artist.
Oh, thank
So
you
we thought
very much.
it'll be all of Nada's everything you see here is for sale at the Lighthouse. And for those of you who want to stay on, please, for dinner or drinks. And thank you so much for coming. And stay
Thank
tuned.
you.
We'll be having more events soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.